Today we delve into a story that will make you look back and ask yourself, did you do everything right in your life? Probably many will answer yes after watching, because Philip's life resembles more of a lunatic asylum. Only a few managed to change their lives and free themselves from the abyss. Nevertheless, there are examples where people who found themselves in a dead end found the strength to start anew. However, if one decides to make such changes, one should bear in mind that not everyone in the immediate environment is ready for them. Philip Taylor was born in Florida in 1966. He lived in a large family with several brothers and sisters. He was described as a good-natured person who lacked something in life. He was always searching for himself. This was clearly evident from a young age. Philip carelessly jumped from one idea to the next and had difficulty concentrating on one thing for long. His school performance also suffered as a result. However, that changed in his youth when Philip found a holiday job in a car repair shop during high school. There he discovered his interest in mechanics. The young Philip therefore dropped out of high school to work with engines and carburetors. He really enjoyed this work. The young man became an excellent specialist whom the whole town knew, but even after that, his dreamy nature still drew him to adventure. When the young man turned 20, he decided to leave Florida and move to Missouri. This brought with it great changes. He first had to get used to the colder climate and find a new job. Philip did not go to Ossack without reason. He immediately found a job as a mechanic in a car repair shop with a man named Marvin. At their first meeting, Marvin immediately gave him a task. He was supposed to fix a car breakdown and was impressed by how easily Philip succeeded. The two became friends. A warm friendship developed between the men. The friends got along well not only in the workshop but also outside. They often visited local bars and restaurants to have a drink and chat. A waitress named Melina Aldrich worked in one of the restaurants. She was a young mother with a 3-year-old daughter whom she was raising alone after her divorce. Philip Taylor seemed to intentionally go to this restaurant more often because he liked Melina. For a time, they only exchanged glances. Philip didn't dare to approach her. When he finally mustered the courage, the woman reciprocated his feelings. A romantic relationship began. Their relationship developed quickly, and so the couple married in 1994. His wife described Philip as an excellent husband and father. He was gentle and caring, which is why the newlyweds immediately decided to expand their family. About a year after the marriage, they had a daughter whom they named Shelby. During this time, Philip worked hard to meet the family's growing needs. The rest of the time he dedicated to his children and his wife. He accepted his wife's daughter as his own, which also impressed his beloved. However, his character remained unchanged. Over time, family life became boring to him. He longed for new experiences. During one of his visits to a bar, he met an 18-year-old woman named April Quick. She was working there for the summer. After a few meetings, feelings developed between the two. However, Philip wanted more. When he confessed his feelings to her, she reciprocated. Thus, a mistress entered the man's life. He still loved Melina, sincerely did not want to leave his daughters, blamed himself, but he could not help himself. He liked April and was flattered by the attention of his young mistress. Unfortunately, in order to find a solution, Philip resorted to a traditional method that is often mistakenly used to deal with problems: alcohol. He began regularly visiting bars and drinking more and more. Alcoholic beverages became his daily companions. Philip was not confrontational or aggressive, no matter how much he drank. His new girlfriend was 10 years younger than Philip Taylor. She seemed satisfied with this relationship and did not want to break up with him. He considered several times how he could end this relationship under various pretexts, but he did not want to lose April. After a year of this love triangle, Philip even started renting a separate house for his mistress where she lived. The young man came to her as if she were his second wife. The double life lasted until 1998. Although Philip drank a lot of alcohol, he remained calm. But Melina became increasingly unhappy that her husband was constantly drinking and rarely at home. Melina wanted to help her husband overcome his addiction and supported him in going through withdrawal, but it didn't help. Therefore, Melina decided that the girls should not grow up with an alcoholic and filed for divorce. The trigger for this decision was the discovery of her husband's affair. When the first wife found out about April, the continuation of the marriage was unthinkable. Against this background, Philip decided during this time to leave his family and return to Florida. The children and his wife naturally reacted negatively to this, but Philip did not plan to stay in Missouri. He took his mistress with him and returned to his small homeland, almost completely breaking off contact with Melina and the girls. He stopped drinking and quickly found a new job in a car repair shop. Now they lived as husband and wife. April became pregnant and gave birth to a second child about a year after they began living together. Philip decided to try again, but during this time many realized that family life and children were probably not for him. It is obvious that all of this constituted an enormous burden for him. The man was under stress and drank more and more to cope with it. It was probably exactly this that led to him being hospitalized at the beginning of 2001 due to health problems. Against this backdrop, the man lost his job. Now it was too difficult to make ends meet, which only worsened the situation. Philip underwent surgery and then immediately went to a rehabilitation clinic as he was ready to tackle his problems and start a new life. At this point, the relationship with April had cooled somewhat, but both desperately wanted everything to go back to how it was before. While Philip was in rehab, the young mother in Florida had nothing to do. Her male relatives did not provide her with the necessary support. The search for work and a babysitter proved difficult. There was no money. When April's family offered her help, she decided to return to Missouri. During this time, the young mother, with the support of her family, found a part-time job and waited for her husband's return. And when Philip left the detox clinic, he immediately made his way to Missouri to his mistress and children. The couple rented a house. For a while, Philip actually managed to stay away from alcohol. After the move, it turned out that the young mother was pregnant again, thus a boy was born. It cannot be ruled out that exactly this event triggered a stressful situation again. Philip collapsed and started drinking again. Finally, he realized that he really wasn't in the right place and no longer wanted to be part of this family. He simply fled and returned to Florida alone, leaving the young April with 3 children behind. During this time, the man spent a lot of time with his friends. It seemed as if he blamed his wives for all the problems. The situation repeated itself. First, he left his first wife based on the same principle. Now April. The man provided neither of them with any support. However, there were reasons for this. He had succumbed to old addictions, couldn't find work, had no money, and was down and out again. All this led to his first wife suing him for non-payment of child support. However, this did not enable him to make the payments. He simply didn't have the means to do so. For this reason, Philip was arrested shortly after his return to Florida for non-payment. According to his own statements, he felt so bad during this time that he was ready for any change. Despite the absurdity of this situation, the man came to the conclusion that a prison sentence might even help him cope with his problems. Philip ended up in prison. During his imprisonment, he did not drink alcohol, lost weight, and overcame his addiction. He became a completely different person. Immediately after his release, the man returned to Missouri. At this point, he had been unemployed for a long time and now decided that he had a new chance to start over. It seemed as if the man had overcome his harmful habits. He found a job as a car mechanic and after half a year was able to open his own workshop after obtaining a license. Philip planned to move and set up a large service business. At least this project was in the realization phase. He bought a plot of land in Missouri, on which he set up a caravan as an office and living space. Now his goal was to build a house here with a large workshop where he could work on cars. For this, he took out a loan and began another, but already more mature, change in his life. He decided to resume contact with his ex-wives and children who had received no support from him up until then. Melina acted loyally. She had long since cooled down and was no longer angry with Philip. However, it was more difficult with April. She had a tougher character. Furthermore, she still remembered very well how her husband had abandoned her at the decisive moment. Everyone who knew Philip Taylor well noticed that he had indeed changed and was apparently on the path to recovery. He had realized that family was more important than alcohol, had overcome his addiction, and now saw this as an important step toward the life he had always dreamed of. Unfortunately, fate was against him precisely at this time, and it was an insurmountable task to cope with another blow of fate. Late in the evening of September 10, 2010, two random passers-by came through the park where Philip Taylor had lived after moving. The witnesses discovered a man lying lifeless on the ground. They immediately called the police. When police officers arrived at the scene, it turned out that the unknown person was already dead. The body was still warm, apparently. The attack had happened only shortly before the witnesses discovered it. The police began a search. The man's pockets were empty and his shirt was missing. A wallet, which was also empty, lay by his feet. His ID was found inside, and it was determined to be the Philip Taylor. When the sheriff heard about it, he said he had known the man personally. Philip had worked here as a car mechanic, had been quite well known, and had planned to open a workshop in the town. The man was found face down not far from the road. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. The attacker had shot him in the back of the head at close range. At first glance, it appeared to be a robbery. The emptied pockets and the wallet thrown on the ground confirmed this assumption. However, upon closer inspection of the victim, investigators discovered traces of stab wounds on the back of his head. Furthermore, his hands were badly cut, indicating an attempt to fight off the killer. Due to the nature of the wounds and the use of multiple weapons, police concluded that there may have been multiple attackers. Philip had fought desperately and suffered too many injuries, suggesting premeditated murder rather than a random incident. The attack, committed in anger, suggested a personal motive. It became clear that the robbery was merely staged, a rather clumsy attempt to trick the investigators. The perpetrator or perpetrators acted unprofessionally and were therefore unlikely to be experienced criminals. It was important to get to know the victim better to uncover conflict situations and acquaintances from his inner circle who might resort to a weapon or even incite accomplices for the attack. The investigators delved into the deceased's biography, as it made the most sense to look for the perpetrator in his immediate environment. They immediately received a valuable clue in the form of the history of his relationships with several women. The police learned about a love triangle and that the deceased was addicted to alcohol and had abandoned his wives and children in critical moments. All of this could have given rise to hatred or jealousy, and the murder would have been an act of revenge. The police did not immediately learn that Philip had a relationship with a new woman named Tammy. The relationship was so new that only the deceased's best friend knew about it. The news of the new relationship complicated the investigation. According to the friend, Philip and his new girlfriend had met shortly before the crime. The unknown woman was a woman who was in the process of separation but officially not yet divorced from her former husband. She, as well as her ex-husband, was on the list of suspects. Tammy was a very mysterious person. The deceased's cell phone was not found. Therefore, apart from her name, there was no information about her. To get more information, including who Tammy was, the investigators went to the caravan where Philip had lived. There they found packaging for a mobile phone that the deceased had purchased shortly before the tragedy. However, he had kept money inside it. Despite intensive searching, the police officers could not find the man's mobile phone. The perpetrators had probably disposed of it after the attack, but the box found made it possible to find out the device's serial number and thus other valuable data. During the search of the caravan, a copy of a letter was found that had been written a few days before his death. In it, Philip Taylor addressed April, who was living in Arkansas at the time. In the letter, he stated that he wanted to restore the relationship with his children. He asked his ex-wife for a meeting and urged her not to obstruct the restoration of the relationship with his children. This letter remained unanswered, although the man had requested a response by September 18. It seemed as if they had been discussing this topic for some time. His mistress might have resisted, as Philip emphasized in his letter that he had been paying child support for 2 years and had the right to see his children. According to the law, he was ready to go to court if an amicable settlement could not be reached. Thanks to the mobile operator's data, Philip's phone could be located using signals and transmission masts. Thus, the direction in which the signal was going could be reconstructed. It turned out that it was heading in the direction where April and her 3 sons lived on that fateful evening of September 10. In parallel, the authorities contacted Malina, Philip's first wife. She reported that he had been a pleasant, quiet person, even during his alcohol addiction. However, his addiction and his subsequent inappropriate behavior made living together impossible. The mother simply did not want the children to have to watch their father slowly kill himself. Furthermore, Melina told in detail about her relationship with April and described the events related to the appearance of this woman in her life. The young mistress seemed to be more aggressive than her husband. According to the first wife, Philip asked her shortly before his death to allow him to resume the relationship with his daughters. Melina had no objection, so the father began to visit his daughters regularly. Recently, there were actually no problems with him. From the beginning, Melina was ready to cooperate with the investigators and seemed genuinely affected by what had happened. The woman repeatedly emphasized that it hurt her that Philip had died just at the moment when he had truly become a good father. She did not seem like a criminal. Now the authorities decided to focus on Tammy and April. They checked Philip's mobile phone and analyzed the calls he received on the day of his death. As it turned out, he was called twice from the same number around. These were the last calls after which Philip was killed. Unfortunately, the police were unable to trace these cell phone numbers because they were not registered. They had to contact the telephone company to check the data. It turned out that the calls were made from Arkansas using a disposable cell phone purchased at Walmart. This store was located near April's new home. The investigators went to this store to check the surveillance camera recordings. This allowed them to actually see the person who had bought the device. Of course, the police officers hoped to see April or at least Tammy, but the camera had captured another woman about whom no one had previously heard or known anything. Philip's extravagant lifestyle and constant search for new experiences had probably driven him to his death. But who was this woman who had bought the disposable cell phone? Why had she called the deceased before his death? Melina and Philip's friends could not identify her in the photo. Suddenly, the police received a call. April contacted the authorities and informed them that her house had been robbed. The woman stated that she had been at the cinema with her children and a friend, and upon returning, found the front door broken open. By the time the police arrived, she had already searched the apartment and determined that a .22 caliber pistol was missing. Interestingly, Philip Taylor had been shot with exactly the same weapon. Despite April's eloquence, the police officers reacted with great skepticism to her words. It seemed there were too many coincidences and that the officers were dealing with a criminal who was desperately trying to lead the investigation into a dead end. A search warrant for the suspect's apartment was obtained. The detectives stormed in with a search. In the inner courtyard of the house, they discovered a burn site still fresh enough to destroy evidence linking the criminal to the murder. Suspicion intensified, as charred clothing and a mobile phone were found there. Examination confirmed that all of this belonged to Philip Taylor. When investigators checked the surveillance camera footage of the cinema where April allegedly went with the children, they could not confirm her statement. She was not there during the specified screening. Thereupon, she changed her story and began desperately trying to justify herself. In particular, she said that she had replied to Philip's letter, but that it had apparently been lost and had not arrived. She justified her calls shortly before his death by saying that she wanted to discuss issues concerning both parents with the children. The woman was noticeably nervous from the start of communication with the authorities and claimed that Philip had always been very cruel to her. According to the worried mother, this was exactly the reason for obstructing contact between the father and the children. She was simply afraid that they would be in constant danger. Her statements were in clear contradiction to the statements of everyone who knew Philip Taylor well, which made the situation even more disturbing. At the end of the interrogation, April asked for a lawyer. 32-year-old April Quick was arrested on suspicion of Philip's murder. Since she was facing a life sentence, April agreed to cooperate with investigators. She was offered a deal in exchange for a milder sentence. The suspect decided to confess to a less serious crime. As it turned out, April was already in a relationship with another man at that time and had a fairly well-established life. Therefore, she did not like Philip's sudden reappearance at all. Originally, his ex-wife was very angry with him and did not want to let him see the children because he was prone to domestic violence. The man insisted that his ex-wife had to grant him access to the children, which April did not want, but Philip threatened to sue. The woman wanted to meet Philip to discuss all possible options, but he would not listen to her. The mother realized that something had to be done. She feared that Philip would use her relationship with another man against her in court. According to April's statement, she drove to this meeting together with her friend Amy Herring, but did not reveal until the end that she was present. The woman wanted to speak with Philip alone. According to her statement, the meeting was not peaceful. An argument broke out, during which the ex-husband grabbed her hair in a fit of rage. The friend who was watching the meeting from the car perceived this as a threat. A .22 caliber pistol was in the car, which was supposed to be used for deterrence. The friend reached for the gun because she suspected it was loaded and unsecured. The worst part was that Philip did not react to Amy's warning and continued to behave aggressively towards April. Therefore, the friend shot accidentally. After confessing this, April burst into tears. She informed the police that her fingerprints were clearly on the weapon, but she had not pulled the trigger. Amy had left her fingerprints on it, therefore they decided to dispose of the weapon. The women knew that they would definitely get into trouble with the police. Therefore, they tried to erase the traces of the attack. They took some of Philip's belongings and burned them, including his cell phone, hoping that he could not be tracked down in the investigation this way. But they were wrong because this only drew more attention. Despite this confession, the police immediately suspected that April was lying again. The distance from which the shot was fired did not match her statement that it was an accident. Clear traces of powder gases could be seen on the back of the victim's head, which can only occur with a shot fired at close range. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet indicated that the shot was fired from top to bottom, as if the victim had been forced to his knees before his execution. It did not appear to be a random case of self-defense. Furthermore, April did not mention the knife that had obviously been used in the attack. To reconcile her story with the facts determined by the police, she began to change it again. The next addition was the knife that Philip allegedly used, but which the women were able to render harmless. He supposedly received several blows to the neck precisely during the fight. The part of the story about the accidental shot remained almost unchanged. April did not comment on the police's statement that not a single witness could be found who would describe Philip as an aggressive or violent person. With the exception of April's statements, he had not been noticed for violent behavior throughout his life. Philip was calm and composed despite his harmful habits. The investigators' distrust was only reinforced because April did not have a single defensive wound. Given the aggressive behavior she described, at least abrasions and cuts should have remained on her body, let alone more serious injuries. However, not a single scratch could be found on her. In the investigators' view, the picture of this encounter looked completely different. Everything was planned. They wanted to scare him or attack him. The motive was simple: revenge out of resentment. April was probably supposed to distract Philip during the conversation. Then Amy showed up and attacked Philip from behind. The women injured him with knives and shot him. Then they took his clothes, and specifically his shirt, and burned them along with his cell phone. It was a setup. The evidence was destroyed in the backyard. The motive for the attack was assumed to be that she wanted to deny the father contact with the children. However, the perpetrators offered no comments. Despite all the inconsistencies between her statement and the evidence, a deal was made with April. 29-year-old Amy was arrested and interrogated. She confirmed April's story, albeit with some deviations. Amy looked very similar to the woman in the surveillance videos from the store. She confirmed that she had bought a disposable cell phone. Her cooperation was taken into account, so the woman was charged with second-degree murder. Amy was sentenced to 15 years in prison and April to 20 years. Philip Taylor's relatives considered this a real setback for justice, as these penalties for killing an overall good person seemed ridiculously light. Unfortunately, a revision of the verdict could not be achieved. Despite the mild sentences, both perpetrators appealed, but this was also unsuccessful. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.